Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining our second quarterly press briefing for 2022. Today, our Director General, Ms. Carol Coy, will be highlighting key indicators for the last quarter of 2021 to March 2022. Following Ms. Coy's presentation, we will take your questions. For the Q&A session, Ms. Coy will be supported by Dr. Natalie Simpson, our Director of Surveys, Ms. Jessica Campbell, our Director of Research, Design and Evaluation, and Ms. Shellyan Chambers, the Unit Head for the Price Indices Unit. Without further delay, I now hand over to Ms. Carol Coy.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our quarterly press briefing, where we will be highlighting key indicators, as was said by Mrs. Green, from the fourth quarter 2021 gross domestic product and the March 22 consumer price index, as well as today we will release the January to December 2021 international merchandise trade statistics and the January 2022 labor force survey results. Going on to the gross domestic product for that fourth quarter. During the fourth quarter of 2021, and that is October to December, the Jamaican economy continued to show signs of recovery from the negative impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which began in 2020. Total value added grew by 6.7% relative to the comparable quarter of 2020. Increases were recorded for both the services and goods producing industries of 9% and 0.5% respectively. The performance of the economy was positively impacted by the relaxation of some COVID-19 measures, including the easing of global travel restrictions and reduced curfew hours. Favorable weather conditions also contributed to the growth in economic activity, particularly in agriculture. The performance of the services industry was the result of increased activities in all industries, with the exception of the producers of government services. The hotels and restaurants industry grew by 79.5%. This industry was impacted by a 184% increase in foreign national arrivals, primarily due to the relaxation of global travel restrictions. Other industries that grew were the wholesale and retail trade, repairs, installation of machinery and equipment, which went up by 10.6%. This was due to higher output levels in agriculture and the construction industries, as well as the relaxation of curfew hours. Other services grew by 10.4%, due mainly to growth in the recreational, cultural, and sporting activities sub-industry. And this segment was impacted by an increase in tourist-related activities, where there was a 167.5% increase in stopover arrivals. Transport, storage, and communication was up by 10.1%. The growth in the transport sub-industry was impacted by a number of factors, including an increase in demand for services, increased operations at the island's cruise ship piers, and the increase in the total number of passengers traveling through both airports. Other increases were observed in electricity and water supply by 5.8%, finance and insurance services by 2.7%, and real estate renting and business activities by 2.1%. The goods producing industries increased by 0.5% due to higher output levels in agriculture, forestry, and fishing of 13.8% and construction 5.9%. However, manufacturing and mining and quarrying declined by 2.2% and 60.5% respectively. The performance of the mining and quarrying industry was influenced by lower output of alumina, primarily attributed to reduced activities at the Jamaica plant as a result of the major fire in August 2021. When compared to the third quarter of 2021, which is July to September, the total value added grew by 1.4%. This was the sixth consecutive quarter of growth since the 15.6% decline in the second quarter of 2020. Preliminary estimates indicated that total value added for the Jamaican economy grew by 4.6% in 2021. And this performance reflected some levels of recovery from the impact of COVID-19. Both the services and goods producing industries grew by 4.7% and 4.3% respectively. We will now turn to the March Consumer Price Index, and as we know, the CPI measures changes in the general level of prices of consumer goods and services purchased by private households. The inflation rate for March 2022 was 1.6%, and this was due mainly to a 1.9% increase in the index for the heaviest weighted division, food and non-alcoholic beverages. The two groups within this division, food and non-alcoholic beverages, registered increases of 2% and 0.6% respectively. Food was mainly impacted by higher prices for tomato, cabbage, onion, and sweet peppers. Other notable increases were in the classes meats, due to higher prices for chicken and other meat products, and fruits and nuts. The overall rate of inflation was also influenced by a 3.9% increase in the index for the division housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels, due to a 9.6% increase in the index for the group electricity, gas, and other fuels, and this was caused by higher electricity rates for the period. However, the increase in the division was tempered by a 1% fall in the index for the group water supply and miscellaneous services to dwelling due to reductions in water and sewage rates. Also contributing to the inflation was a 0.6% increase in the transport division's index, due mainly to higher prices for fuels and lubricants. The point-to-point inflation rate, which is March 2021 to March 2022, was 11.3%. This has been the largest point-to-point change since the implementation of the new CPI basket in April 2020. The main contributors to this upward movement were the divisions food and non-alcoholic beverages, up by 14.7%, housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels, up by 9.6%, and transport, which grew by 14.3%. The increase in the index for the division food and non-alcoholic beverages was mainly attributed to higher prices for items such as tomato, lettuce, and yam, which resulted in a 22.1% increase in the index for the class vegetables, tubers, plantains, cooking bananas, and pulses. Also impacting the division's movement was an increase of 18.3% in the index for the class meat and other parts of slaughtered land animals. Impacting the division housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels was a 20.9% increase in the index of the class electricity, gas, and other fuels, resulting from higher rates for electricity. Higher prices for all petrol products and an increase in bus, route taxi, and hackney carriage fares in August 2021 resulted in the 14.3% increase in the transport division's index. For the 2021-2022 fiscal year, the inflation rate was 11.9%. Turning now to the scheduled release of the international merchandise trade for 2021. Jamaica's total spending on imports increased by 25.4% for January to December 2021. Total imports were valued at $6 billion compared to $5 billion in 2020. This increase was largely attributable to higher imports of raw materials, intermediate goods, which went up by 24.4%, fuels and lubricants, which increased by 65%, and consumer goods, which increased by 12.3%. It must be noted, however, that expenditure on imports for the year was still below that of 2019, which was prior to COVID-19. It was 6.7% below the amount spent in 2019. Total export earnings in 2021 were valued at $440.5 million, an increase of 15.2% relative to 2020. Exports of mineral fuels, which rose by 75.5%, was the main contributor to this increase. Despite the increase in earnings from total exports in 2021, revenues was 12.9% below that of the pre-pandemic period in 2019. Earnings from domestic exports increased by 10% to $1.3 billion, and this was due to a rise in exports from manufacture and agricultural industries, which increased by 30.8% and 8.1% respectively. The increase in exports in manufacturing in 2021 was due mainly to increases in the export of other manufactured goods, 49%, and food and beverages and tobacco, 14.5%. Over the past 3 years, the manufacturer's industry share to total domestic exports moved from 30.8% in 2018 to 56.3% in 2021. Increased exports of yams, other fruits and beverage crops, and coffee were the main contributors to the increase in the agriculture industry. Exports of yam increased by 4.4%, while earnings from fruits and beverage crops and coffee rose by 34.3% and 8.9% respectively. Earnings from the mining and quarrying industry amounted to $465.2 million, a decline of 10.6% when compared to 2020. Exports of both alumina and bauxite declined in 2021. We will now turn to the January 22 labor force survey. And as is usual, STATIN conducts a quarterly labor force survey designed to produce official national statistics on the labor market, including the number of persons employed, unemployed, and outside of the labor force. Today's release highlights the findings of the January 2022 labor force survey. We will start with the employed labor force. In January 2022, there were 1,257,100 persons employed in Jamaica. This was an increase of 4.8%, or 57,800 persons, compared to January in 2021. These persons were engaged in economic activities for at least 1 hour during the reference week, which was December 12 to 18, 2021. Females recorded the larger increase in the number of persons employed. The number of employed females grew by 5.5%, while for employed males, the increase was 4.3%. Looking at the employed labor force by industry, the industry group real estate and other business services accounted for the largest increase in employment of 24.9%, moving to 126,600. This was followed by accommodation and food service activities, which increased by 16.5% to 98,200 persons. The construction industry grew by 8.9% to 125,800 persons, and manufacturing by 10.3% to 80,400 persons. Looking at the employed labor force by occupation group, The group clerks accounted for the largest increase in employment of 22,100 persons, with females accounting for the majority of this increase, 13,000. Employment also increased in the groups service workers and shop and market sales workers, 15,700 persons, professionals, senior officials and technicians, 13,500 persons, craft and related trade workers, 10,900 persons. The largest increase in male employment was in the occupation group, craft and related trade workers. Males represented the majority of the increase in this group, moving up by 10,200. Looking at the unemployment rate in January 2022 was 6.2% compared to 8.8% for the same quarter of 2021. This was 2.6 percentage points lower than the same quarter of 2021. The unemployment rate for males decreased to 4.8% from 7.6%. Similarly, the unemployment rate for females declined to 7.9% from 10.4%. It should be noted, however, that in spite of the lower unemployment rate in January 2022, which is 6.2, compared to January 2020, which is 7.3, the quarter before the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, there were more employed persons in January 2020 than in January 2022. Looking at youth unemployment, the youth unemployment rate declined by 5.1 percentage points to 17.7% relative to January 2021. There was a larger decline in female youth unemployment. The unemployment rate for both males and females declined by approximately 5%. Male youth unemployment was 14.5%, while for females it was 21.8%. Looking at persons outside of the labor force, persons 14 years or older who were neither employed nor unemployed are classified as being outside the labor force. In January 2022, there were 755,600 persons outside the labor force. Males outside the labor force declined by 8,000, while females declined by 14,400. Looking at the overall size of the labor force, there were 1,340,600 persons in the labor force in January 2022. This represents an increase of 1.9% or 24,800 persons compared to January 2021. There was a larger increase of females in the labor force. While the male labor force increased by 9,200 persons, the female labor force increased by 15,600 persons. The increase in females represented 62.9% of the total increase. I will now give an update of the 2022 population and housing census. Preparation for data collection for the 2022 population and housing census has intensified. We recently completed the first round of the recruitment for the census field worker, where we invited persons to apply for the post of census taker and census supervisor. We are currently processing the applications and the scores from the online assessment. Successful applicants who will move on to the next phase will be contacted in the coming days to participate in an in-person screening exercise. This screening process will begin in the western region of the island and then move to the northern and central parishes. We thank everyone who applied to work in the census. The response to recruitment drive was very positive, and we trust that this will transcend to the census takers when data collection begins in September. In closing, I take this opportunity to acknowledge the work of the management and staff of the Institute. STATIN thanks the respondents who continue to take time out of their busy schedules to participate in our household and business surveys. We reiterate the need for continuous participation in our surveys. We also thank the respective ministries, departments, and agencies for making administrative records available for the compilation of statistics. We encourage everyone to visit our website at statinja.gov.jm for all the tables associated with today's releases. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Coy, for your presentation. We will now open for questions. Please use the raised hand icon for the questions, and when you're identified, you can begin your questions. Thanks. Are there any questions? Douglas?
Hello, are you hearing me?
You can go ahead, Douglas.
Okay, good afternoon. Thanks. Let's have a couple of questions here. Firstly, with the change in the start of the census data collection exercise being shifted to September, will there be an April labor force survey undertaken?
Okay, I think that question is for Ms. Coy. Douglas is asking if there's any plans for a labor force survey in April.
The April labor force is actually currently in the field. We will also be doing a July labor force. It's the October labor force that will be impacted by the census.
Thanks, Ms. Coy, for that one. Just realizing that that one would have been for Dr. Simpson. Are there any other questions? Oh, Douglas again has another question.
Okay, in Ms. Coy's presentation, she noted that the unemployment rate for January 2022 is lower than the corresponding for January 2020 prior to COVID. Is it that the economy is recovering and more persons are being employed?
Okay, thank you very much for that question, Douglas. That question will go to Dr. Simpson.
And sorry, and on that matter, let me just ask this other question that corresponds. The unemployment the unemployment rate for January 2022 is lower than that for 2020. And why is this so? What has caused this?
Okay. Dr. Simpson?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So just to thank you very much, Douglas, for your question. So let me just reiterate some of the things that Ms. Coy said earlier in her presentation. So the number of persons employed in January 2022 was 1.2 million persons, 57,100. And that is 57,800 larger than in January 2021, and still though less than the numbers employed in January 2020, which is 15,600. So there is a difference in terms of the rate at 6.2 for January 2022 compared to 7.3 in January 2020. However, in terms of the actual number of persons employed, there are more persons employed in January 2020. I'm not sure, I don't remember the second question that you asked. Can you just repeat that for me?
Douglas, can you repeat the second question? I think it was a follow-up on the first one, Dr.
He was
Simpson.
asking what would explain those changes.
Right.
Right. Okay. So we were seeing for this January 2022, when we look at the data, we're seeing increases in a number of industries, and particularly, let me point out the first four. Real estate and other business services, which increased by 25,200 persons. Accommodation and food services, which increased by 13,900. Construction, which increased by 10,300, and manufacturing by 7,500. So those are just some of the industry groups that stood out for this particular quarter.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Simpson. Are there any other questions?
Sorry, not to hog the show. I have one last question relating to the census.
Okay.
As it regards the screening process that was indicated, when will that begin and what's the duration of that exercise?
Okay, thank you very much for that question.
Okay, we hope to start the screening of our census takers soon. So as I said before, we are in the process of going through the applications, and there was a pre-employment test. So we have to go through that. So we hope that maybe in the next 2 weeks, we will be able to can start the screening process. Because after the screening process, there's a process afterwards where we have to start training. So the screening is to identify persons which we can move towards the training. And what we will be doing is moving across the island. So we'll be focusing, as I said, on the western region of the western parishes and moving across as we come closer to the parishes in the east.
Thanks, Ms. Coy. Are there any other questions? All right, if there are no further questions, thank you very much for joining our quarterly press briefing. And just to reiterate what Ms. Coy said, you can visit our website at STATIN. There's one more question. Okay, Ms. Bennett. I think there's one question from Karina Bennett. You can go ahead, Karina. We're not hearing. Karina, can you please unmute your mic, please? Or maybe you could type in the chat.
So Georgia, I'm seeing a question. She says whether or not, and I'm hoping you can hear me clearly, right?
Yes, I can.
So her question is, will there be any more COVID impact surveys done? I think the reference is to the COVID module that we added to the labor force. No, that has been discontinued. So we no longer feel the COVID module on the labor force survey.
Thanks, Dr. Simpson. Are there any other questions? No? All right. Thank you very much. All right. So we invite everyone to visit our website at statinja.gov.jm for all the tables associated with today's release. Thank you very much and do have a wonderful day.